Go ahead, or okay, cool. Good evening, everybody. For those of you who were with us 20 seconds ago, I'm going to be looking at a couple of photographs on through the software that I use, and also discussing the process behind taking the photograph and the thought process behind the actual the post-production to try and finesse the photograph so that it works quite nicely. So I'm going to jump this into a share screen so that you can all, there we go. So in theory, you should be able to see a display of images in front of you. I'm going through Capture One, which is my preferred processing software, but it actually doesn't really matter what you're using. So what I thought I would start with is probably one of the oldest ways to process your images, because it dates all the way back to the very beginning of photography, and that's dodging and burning. So I'm going to look at, in particular, well, let's start with this photograph. I'm going to just bring it up so you can see it over here. So this is a little alleyway of trees, or avenue of trees in the UK near Leeds. And basically, when I saw the scene, I wanted to try and capture something of that mystical, ethereal sort of feel to the green, and as the light came through and everything. And this is very much how I perceived the scene when I photographed it. But when you see the actual photograph itself, before it was processed, that's what it looks like. So it's not exactly how I saw it in my mind's eye. And this is something you'll probably come across whenever you're shooting, is that you'll see a photograph, you'll take the photograph, and then later on you'll look at the scene and you'll go, that's not what I saw. So a lot of my post-production revolves around trying to get the photograph back to a point in time that it's how I remembered it. And yes, sometimes it is a slightly rose-tinted view of the world. Other times it's a bit darker. It also depends on the emotional mood you're in when you're out photographing. So at any rate, this was my raw file that I had. Now, I opened it up in Photoshop, and I'm going to show you the technique of dodging and burning in the most simple way possible. Okay, so I've already loaded it up in Photoshop. So let me just close off this little thing over here. And I actually have, got to get all the faces out of the way over here. I actually have the layers that I worked on as I brought it through. So I'm going to quickly switch off these layers so you can see what it looked like as the file came in. So I did a little bit of tweaking in Capture One first to bring up my shadows and bring down the highlights and to bring out a little bit of the color itself. But then what I did was dodging and burning in a very, very simple way. And I've actually created these layers on the right-hand side so that you can actually dodge and burn on a separate layer. Now, the easiest way to do this, and I'm not going to talk about using the actual dodge burn controls, which you can find on the left-hand panel, or using them in things like the Tony Caper panels. The simplest, easiest way to understand dodging and burning is to create a new gray layer above your photograph itself and to change its blend mode, and then paint very lightly dark and light ink onto that. Okay, so if I wanted to do that, I've even built an action inside here which basically says, where have I put it? Burn dodge layer. So if I click that and press play, it does it for me automatically. But I'm going to show you how to do this step by step. So when you look at the recording, you can actually do this at a later stage with your own images. So first what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to fill it with gray ink. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New Fill Layer. In fact, wait, I just want New Layer, I think it is. Well, let's just try it for New Fill Layer. Solid color, there we go, yes. And we want the color to be gray, and we want the mode to be soft light, opacity is 0. Bang. All right, and then I'm going, sorry, that's actually the wrong tool. Oops, sorry. I'm going to go back one on that. Sorry about this, hang on. Cancel. It's new layer and then fill. So let's go layer, new, there we go. New layer. Then we're going to say mode, soft light. No, not hard light, soft light. And layer 2 is fine. Let's just go okay, right. And we're going to fill this with gray ink. So 50% gray over here. And there we go. Except, let me just check that this is all working. Yeah, so now we've got a gray layer that's inside here. If I want to darken anything, all I need to do is take my normal brush tool, so shortcut key B. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing over here. And we're going to paint black or white ink. Now, if I paint black ink, it's going to get very dark. Can you see how I'm doing it over there? If I paint white ink, it's going to get white ink. It's going to get lighter. And it's as simple as that. So what I do is essentially choose the areas that I want to lighten, use a nice soft brush, bring its opacity down, and just gently lighten it up. So I'm going to delete that layer over here, and you can actually see in this lighten layer that I've created, pull this back a bit so we can see the full screen there, and forward. Right, so if I look at this layer that I created with lighten, can you see how I've taken brush strokes and I've just basically lightened up pools of light and on the trees themselves to be able to lighten up where I wanted it to show some of that light filtering through from the greenery above. So I'm switching off the layers above again so you can just see the difference here. So notice this tree, I've lightened up so that you get that rim of light coming through. I've lightened up this area so that the light coming onto the dead leaves here just pools slightly. And I've lightened up this tree on the left-hand side as well, just to try and bring out some more of that glow that sort of suffuses around trees when you get the lovely sort of diffuse lighting coming through foliage. Okay, now what I've done is I've done this all on a separate layer so that I can change it at any stage. I can go back and I can lighten other areas or darken other areas. What I've then done is I've done the whole process once more. I've created another layer, I've filled it with gray ink, and now this one is the darks. So you can see how I've darkened the edge of the vignette almost. And if I want to see what that looks like itself, I can go in and I've darkened the limbs of this tree, and I've also darkened a little bit of the foliage in the top. So we can actually see this area here has been darkened. Without it, it just lightens up just a touch too much just along these leaves here. And it means that your eye leaves the frame completely. So to try and encompass the eyes inside the frame, I've just tried to darken that a touch. Okay. Then the other thing that I've done, and it's a very, very simple technique as well, is something called the autumn technique. And it's particularly useful if you're photographing in a forest, because again, we get that diffuse lighting feel to the scene and that sense of sort of mystical, ethereal softness. So to do that, all I've done is I've taken these three layers and I've combined them into a new layer over here. And what I've then done is I've taken a Gaussian blur to that. So to do that, you would just go up to, let's go to filter, and you would then say blur, and you go into Gaussian blur, and then you can filter it as much as you like. Okay. Now, the critical thing about it though is that I've been selective about how I'm going to apply it. So first off, I've changed my opacity. So if you want to see what this really looks like without all of the changes I've made to it, that's the scene that I created. Okay, and in fact, let's change this back to normal. There you go. So there's my Gaussian blur as I've created it. It's these three layers below combined into a new layer. This is an important control to learn, incidentally, and it basically means merge all layers into new layer. And it's called the claw because of the very weird hand control you've got to do on your keyboard. And it basically is, if you're using a Mac, it's Shift-Alt-Command-E. And if you're using a PC, it is Shift-Control-Alt-E. That's it. And all it does is it creates a new layer with everything below it. At any rate, this is what your autumn mask looks like. It's essentially a softened version of the photograph beforehand. So what we're now going to do is we're going to apply that just using a mask to certain areas. But before I get to that, I want to get it to that diffused look again. And the easiest way to do that is to take your blend mode and to change it to soft light. Boom, just like so. Then I'm going to reduce my opacity. I had it at about 40%. So I'm going to bring that back to 40. So now you can start to see how it just gives that slight wispiness to the light itself. But then importantly, I want to see detail coming through in things like this tree limb over here, and in the tree here, and potentially in the rocks or the stone wall itself. So that's why I created this mask. And there's the mask that I've created using, okay, you don't have to use luminosity masks like I've done here. But essentially, anything that's white is where you're going to see your autumn effect, and anything that is dark is where you're then going to see, or it's going to cut through and you're going to get the detail. All right. And then a last little thing I did was just add a touch of vibrance to it, so you get that green coming through. Now, the important thing when you do any kind of post-production though is you need to have a mental map in your head before you start. You want to be able to look at your photograph and go, that's not what I photographed. I want it to be, greener. I want it to be slightly brighter or warmer. I need to have more diffuse lighting. I need it to be softer, or I want it to be sharper. If you don't have a mental map before you start looking at your image, you're going to end up just throwing a whole bunch of techniques at it and coming out with basically a mess. So it makes sense to be able to, and in fact, I recommend this, look at your photograph on a screen and then grab a piece of paper. And with a pen or pencil, write down the things you'd like to do, the things you want to do to change the image itself. That way you've almost got a map or a guide or a goal in mind. And it works a lot more effectively than simply throwing the photograph onto the screen and playing until you feel happy with it. So having some kind of order always helps, even if you don't know how to do it. The fact that you know what you want to do, or you know how you want it to end up looking like, means that it's going to be easier to figure out how to do it at a later stage. Okay, any questions quickly on that before I move on to the next image? Okay, I don't see any hands going up or anything like that, so I assume everybody's happy for the time being. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm going to pull this down over here. Okay, so where are we? So if we go back to these photographs over here, now a lot of people will ordinarily, I just need to be able to see faces as well so that I know that I haven't lost internet over here, sorry. There we go, right. A lot of people are then concerned when I start talking about Photoshop going, ooh, it's too much stuff, how am I going to do this? The thing is, you can do all of that dodging and burning using Lightroom or Capture One or Exposure, I think it's called Exposure X5 or something. All the different raw editors, they're still allowing you to do your dodging and burning. So this photograph was done predominantly in Photoshop, but then this photograph, on the other hand, was done entirely in raw processing using nothing more than Capture One. Okay, so here is my image as I originally shot it, and you can actually see with the crop marks inside here. And I'm going to take it back to before and after, so you can see what it looked like before. There you go. So here is our before scene, and actually let me just go back to before. So I think I've got another version of this with this full without the crop. Where is it? No, I don't. Okay, cool. So we've just got this one. So you can see, here is my before photograph. That's the color that came through from the sensor itself. But again, when I was taking the photograph, I had more of a sort of elvish J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings kind of feel to the photograph itself. This incidentally was photographed just by hole in the wall. Now everybody goes to hole in the wall and they photograph the hole in the wall, whereas I also like to look at what else is around there. And this was just a really nice arrangement of trees that created this sort of tunnel effect, so long as you balance precariously on a branch to be able to shoot through them. But it worked, and I quite liked the whole sense of the trees creating this sort of vortex of wood that you look into, which was quite nice. One thing critical about photographing forests like this, or at least I believe it's critical, is that the use of a polarizer is always going to bring out more color and depth in your image, because what it's doing is it's actually removing the reflections that are created on the foliage themselves. Leaves are highly reflective of light. They've got that gloss on them. So to get rid of that and actually see the real color of the leaf, adding a polarizer and twisting it until the color comes through is going to give you more of that sense of a foresty feel when you shoot it. So 90% of my forest scenes, and in fact this previous one as well, this image here, are shot with a polarizer on the camera. Okay, so at any rate, I was up in the tree. I had my lens trained on this. It's a longer lens, it's 70 to 200, so I'm zooming in to create that compression effect as well. and I've got the polarizer on it. Now, what I then did, let me just go back to before, is as in Photoshop and Lightroom, or sorry, as in Photoshop, you can create layers of the changes and the effects that you're wanting to create. So I'm shooting with this in Capture, and you can see I've created several layers inside here. You can do the same thing in Photoshop, except you're not going to call, sorry, not Photoshop, Lightroom. You can do the same thing in Lightroom, except you're not going to call it layers, you're going to call it filters or brushes. And you can have as many as you want. So every time you put in a brush, you can have it lightening something, or you could have it darkening, or you could do anything you like, really. So I've got my base image. So I'm going to switch these off as we go. Boom, boom, boom. So there's my base image. And in this base image, you can see that I have increased my saturation and brightness. I've added some contrast. And I don't think I did anything to the color. Let me just quickly check. Nope, didn't do anything to the color. That was all pretty much as shot. Okay, so that was just my background layer. I've then gone in and I've added another layer. This is what we would call a local adjustment. And it's the same thing in Lightroom. And once more, having a piece of paper and writing down the order of your edits is a good idea, because it gives you some kind of map through which you're going to edit your photograph. So at any rate, what I've first done is I looked at this and I realized I want to have more of that mistiness in my greens. So I've reduced the clarity in my greens by creating a new layer and doing exactly like I did in Photoshop. I've taken my clarity down. So in other words, it's a lot like using that Gaussian blur. And you'll see the same thing in Lightroom. You've got a clarity slider. If you pull your clarity slider to the left-hand side, you're going to end up creating some blur. But critically, I didn't want this to appear everywhere. So I'm going to switch on my mask now. Oh, why is it not switching on? There we go, right. So everything that you see red here at the moment is where my filter has been applied to. So it's the same thing as working in Photoshop and then taking a brush and saying, I only want to affect my greens, or I only want to try this particular tone, or I only want this particular detail to have this effect brought through in it. And in Photoshop now, sorry, not Photoshop, I keep saying Photoshop, I mean Lightroom. In Lightroom, you can now adjust your mask or your brush based on color and luminosity, which is really exciting, because now you can say, I only want my effect to be applied to the greens. So you can take your clarity and bring it down, but it's only going to be applied to the greens, which is amazing. I think that's fantastic, because now we can really get into those localized adjustments. So at any rate, this adjustment here, I'm trying to switch it off now. There we go. So this adjustment here is essentially taking that clarity slider and only applying it to the greens so that you get that softer feel to the image itself. After that, I actually wanted to add clarity back in case I'd lost some of it. So I created another layer. And over here, this layer is going to show you that I've gone and added clarity and contrast to all of my browns. So everywhere where there were branches and twigs, so you get that gritty feel coming through where you can feel the bark. And in fact, if you print this really large, in fact, if I zoom in, you'll get a better idea of this. Just let it render. There we go. You can actually see we've got nice crisp detail in all of the bark. So that it feels like you've got a texture. But then when you look at the greens and the leaves inside in the background, they feel almost soft, which is kind of the idea behind the image that I was trying to create. Okay, and then lastly, I've just done, what did I do in this one? Oh, just a final sort of tweak to the overall brightness on the left-hand side. Now, you'll notice that in this image, it's a lot darker on the right-hand, oh, sorry, I want to switch that off there. There we go. It's a lot darker on the right-hand side over here. So what's happening is the viewer looks at the image, but their eye tracks to the left-hand side because it's brighter over here. Now, basically what happens when we see an image is our eye always moves across to the brightest point of the scene. So if you don't want your viewer's eye to track to that area, you need to think about reducing that. So what I did was I added another layer over here, and all I did is I changed my brightness and my contrast so that this is slightly darker and we end up with that tunnel effect over here. And then obviously as a final thing, I also cropped it. So there you go. There's my final scene over there. I think if I remember correctly, I pushed it through Nik FX right at the end just to reduce some of the color slightly and bring it down so it had a slightly more pastel-y look to it. But again, none of this was particularly complex because it didn't go into Photoshop. This never touched Photoshop. It was all done in the actual raw processor. So you don't need to have a huge program like Photoshop or GIMP or Pixelmator or anything like that to be able to adjust your photographs. Lightroom or Capture One or Alien Exposure, what is it called again? Anyway, one of those raw editors, they're all absolutely sufficient for doing this kind of work. Having said that though, Photoshop is the only program that you're going to be able to do layers of different photographs. Okay, so, sorry, I hope I'm not going too fast. Right, at any rate, any questions on this image before I move on? Okay, I can't see everybody's faces here because I've got this little block with all the things. Okay, no hands up or anything, so I can continue in that case. Again, there will be a recording, so we can come back to this, or you can come back to this at some point and go through the photos or through the recording itself. Okay, so let's see, what was the next image I wanted to look at? Oh yes, this is the other thing, is a lot of people think that to achieve certain images, so I'm going to look at this guy over here, you're going to need multiple photographs to be able to do anything to that image. That's not necessarily the case. This particular image is a single exposure, one exposure. And when you zoom in, it's clean, it's sharp, there's almost no noise. And yeah, people are often surprised when they see something like this and they go, wow, you must have done something fancy to be able to achieve this. And the answer is no, I didn't. If I actually open up the photograph that I was working on over here, so let me just get back out so I can see all my controls and everything, you can see there's the photograph, and that's what it looked like before. Okay, it looks pitch black. The trick to doing a photograph like this is to know the parameters of your camera. And usually, if you photograph for the best data, you can actually achieve amazing things in terms of pulling out detail. So this was shot at ISO 64. So I'm using my base ISO. I'm using a nice long exposure with a fairly decent depth of field. But the trick here is to make sure that it's shot in RAW and that it is at its base ISO. Now, base ISO is what all of your cameras are designed to record light onto the pixels with. So essentially, regardless of what you do at the end, you get the most data, so literally little pixels falling through into your stencils if you use the base ISO with the correct exposure. So what I did when I photographed this is I kept my eye on the histogram while I was shooting, and I made sure that I was not clipping in my highlights, although my moon did clip ever so slightly, but very critically that I had details in my shadows. If I pull this out over here and just make it a bit bigger so you can see it. Can I make it bigger, bigger, bigger? No, I can't. Oh dear. I was hoping I could, but apparently I can't. If you look over here, the only pixels that are clipping are the blue. So, which is fairly fine if you're going to be shooting the night sky or anything, because that's all blue and it's dark anyway. So you can forget about that. But critically, my reds and my greens have got detail right down into the basic shadows. So it means that when I pull my sliders, so over here you can actually see I've come and brought my exposure up by 2 whole stops over there. So it went from there and up, and I've brought up my blacks. So they were down there, and I've just brought them up a little bit like so. And I've even had to bring my highlights down ever so slightly. Otherwise, the tree would have blown out a bit. So you don't need to do lots and lots of exposures to be able to get your photograph right. You just need to have a good base exposure. And as I say, your final result can end up looking something like that, which I was quite happy with the results, particularly considering I spent all of about 30 seconds working on that image. Okay, so at any rate, that's what you can do with one exposure. But if you can do more than one exposure, then it starts getting exciting. So what I've done is inside here, I've actually already opened them up inside Photoshop. But so this is again at Keetmanshoop in Namibia, and we were looking at the night sky, and we were trying to paint the tree, but we weren't always getting the tree exactly right. So, oh dear, I see I've got a spinning beach ball of death. Let me just get this so it stops spinning, so I can look at the photos here. Oh, come on. Ah, there we go. Right, we're back again. Good. Okay, so if I look at this photograph here, this is my initial exposure before we actually started lighting the tree, just with a little headlamp kind of thing. So we've got a nice photograph of the stars. It looks quite good. We can see a little bit of the Milky Way over there. There's some meteors going on, but there's no light on the tree. And we did want a bit of light on the tree. So we tried one after a while, and there's the first light on the tree. Quite nice, strong side light coming from the left-hand side. It looks quite good, but I needed a little bit more light around the edge. So we have another exposure over here. I think that's correct. With just slightly wrapped around on the other side. And you can see one of those branches is slightly better. Okay, so we've got these three photographs. How do we combine them so that they work seamlessly together? And the simplest way is to load all of these up into Photoshop. So I've actually already done that, so we didn't have to look at any spinning beach balls. There we go. And I have loaded them into 3 layers. So I've got my dark layer on top, and then I've got these 2 images of the lights themselves. Okay, I can see there's a little bit of movement between these frames as well. So I'm going to shift these things around slightly. Okay, so we'll start off by doing this one. So I'm going to just do this manually without doing anything fancy or automatic. I'm just going to take my opacity down slightly on the one image and just make sure that we are lined up by using my move tool. There we go. And just shift it a little bit. And you can see that my tree over here sharpens up when I click it 1 pixel to the left. I think that's right. Where is this one? Let me just do this manually then. Ah, there we go. That's better. Right. Okay, so that's all lined up. And then I'm just going to line up this guy over here and do the same thing. Let me just pull this up, and then this one. Ah, you can actually see there's a bit of a halo around this image here. So this one needs to be moved as well. I'm just going to move it into place. Everything was shot on a tripod, as it should be. But even when you're shooting on a tripod, it's amazing how much little imperceptible movement can actually ruin your photograph. At any rate, there we go. We've now got our images all lined up. So what we're now going to do is, very simply, I'm going to blend through the different layers using a brush, basically. But before we do that, we can actually see what the photograph looks like just by changing the blend mode. So if I select these images here, and I go to my blend mode, and I'm just going to call that lighten, there you go. You can see my trees are looking great over there, and so is, yeah, so the foreground's awesome, looks great. But what on earth is happening to the stars? So basically, the problem we have here now is that our stars are revolving. You can actually see 3 different versions of each of the little stars because of the time difference between each of the frames. So to correct that, all we need to do is brush it out, basically. So if I go back to this over here, I'm going to create a little mask over there, and I'm just going to paint black ink. And you can see how those, oh, sorry, it helps if I'm at 100% opacity. There you go. I'm just going to paint those out. You can be rough because it's not a particularly, I'll wait for the spinning balls again. There we go. Right, and we'll do this again to the one below. And in fact, because it is the same photograph, essentially, I can just duplicate this particular mask by holding my Alt button and pulling down. And there we go. Right, I can see we've got some issues over here, so I've just got to bring that back. So I'm going to paint some white ink onto our trees. Just there. And there we go. Right, and that's it, nice and easy. So all we've done is we've taken 3 photographs. It's almost exactly as out of camera. And all I've done is I've layered them and using the blend mode, lightened up where I want to lighten up on the trees themselves. So it's fairly simple. Now the basic idea behind lighten, and it's an important tool to remember with these blend modes, is that if I stick it to lighten and I've got 3 or 4 layers on top of each other, what you see is the lightest pixel in all of those layers. Was that a question coming through? No, okay, right. If I were to put it to darken, it's going to look at all of those layers. Let's say there's 3 layers over there, and it's going to try and find the darkest pixel in those 3 layers. So each of these blend modes is going to do something like that. Soft light is, okay, I'm not going to go into the full descriptions of soft light and overlay and stuff, but it's basically the pixels interacting with each other. But the easiest ones to understand are lighten and darken. Darken is always going to find the darkest pixel. Lighten is always going to find the lightest pixel. Screen, and they actually are in different areas as well. So these are all going to ultimately lighten the image, and these are all going to ultimately darken the image. Okay, so it's a very simple way to paint through without having to worry about masks and stuff, because you know that you're wanting the brightest pixels to come through. It's worth experimenting with it, because you can also try it with things like skies. Let's say you've got some clouds that you want to darken up. You can use your blend modes to actually darken the clouds themselves. Okay, so that's a fairly simple way to do that. I wanted to go into using the mask though and layers to be able to actually remove something from your scene itself. Now, this is quite an. Was there a question? Sorry, I keep hearing a voice.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go for it, Liz.
When you're talking about base ISO,
yeah,
what are you actually meaning?
So your base,
each camera, or
your base ISO is usually the lowest ISO on your camera. So if you're shooting with a Fujifilm XT, I'm trying to remember what the lowest ISO is on them now. But okay, XT1 for instance, the lowest ISO on the XT1 is 200 ISO. That is your optimum image quality. If you were to go to anything lower or higher, you're going to end up reducing the level of the pixel data that's coming into your camera. Most cameras have a base ISO of 100 ISO. Some cameras, like I shoot with the Nikon D850, it has a base ISO of 64. Now, Nikon shooters, you also have what they call low, 0.3, 0.6, and 1, okay? What those are is it's actually a boost. It's not your low, it's not your base ISO. It is an artificial slowing down of the light. So when you go to, I think it's the D7200 has a base ISO of 200 ISO, if I'm not mistaken. And then low 1 would effectively be ISO 100, but it has the same ISO characteristics as if you were shooting at ISO 400. So base ISO is always the lowest ISO that is marked as having an ISO. It doesn't say high or low. Okay, the Sony A7S, for instance, has a very high base ISO because it's designed as a low light camera. Most Canon cameras, from what I understand, are base ISO of 100 as well. You can just, if you look at your camera manual, you'll basically see what it is. But ordinarily, and in fact, I can't think of any examples where this isn't the case, the lowest numbered ISO is your base ISO. Okay. Something else to be aware of in that regard, though, is some cameras are what they call ISO invariant, which means it actually doesn't matter what ISO you're shooting on. It's always shooting at base ISO, and then it's using software algorithms to ramp up the exposure. That's all. Okay. You can tell the difference between an ISO invariant and an ISO variant camera by basically taking a photograph at ISO 100 and then a photograph at ISO 6400, putting them next to each other in Photoshop and trying to replicate the exposure on them. So if your ISO 100 and your ISO 6400 look the same, if you ramp the exposure, then it's an ISO invariant camera. If the ISO 100 file has more noise, it's an ISO variant camera. It's a bit of gobbledygook. You don't really need to know much about that. But the point is, certain cameras look at light in different ways. Yeah, but basically, the best image quality will always come from base ISO. It's what the camera's been designed to shoot around. Does that help, Liz?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions while we're taking a pause? Okay, all good. Okay, so I was sitting in one of the most amazing places in the world. Absolutely love it. Dead Flay. And I had a Russian photographer wander into my scene. And then straight after that, she decided she would stop. And she stayed there while the light got better and better and better. So I had to find a way to get rid of her. And I realized what was happening as she was wandering into the scene. So I started shooting. So you can see I've got a photograph here and a photograph over there. 2 images as she wanders into the scene. All you need to do is remember, take lots and lots and lots of photographs, and then later on choose photographs so that she or he or it or whatever happens to be the issue in your photograph are not there anymore. Then what you do is you're going to bring them into Photoshop. Let me find my Dead Flay image. So here's the actual finished file. I'm just going to close up that little video screen again. So here's the finished file that you can see. And there is no, is this the big one or the JPEG? No, that's right. Sorry, why is this not zooming in? Ah, there we go. That's better. Sorry about that. All right. So there we go. There's my photograph with 0 Russian photographers with yellow hats inside the scene. So the basic idea behind this, have I actually combined these things here? So let me just go back down all the way. Oh dear, I don't have my combined shot here. Okay, so I'm going to quickly do that in that case. Let me go back to here. I'm going to open these 2 images in Photoshop. So I'm going to say edit, edit in Photoshop. I'm going to edit variants. And they will come through quickly. The image that we were looking at in Photoshop over there was an image that I'd already flattened. So I'm going to get to that same point by bringing these into Photoshop quickly. Okay, so there we go. Here's my 2 images. I'm going to select this image and copy it and just paste it inside here. Okay, you can see that there's some movement inside the frame as well. Not a problem. We can very easily correct that by selecting our layers. So I'm going to select these 2 layers. I'm then going to go up to Edit, Auto Align Layers. And there's lots of detail here, which is great. So it's going to be able to pick up all those trees and the grass in the background and the horizon line and everything. And it's going to very easily layer it nicely. So now from there, I can crop it if I want to. So let's just get it back to what I was looking at. Oh dear, the spinning balls again. So let's just crop this down. Okay. Okay, right, so now let's get rid of our Russian photographer. Okay, so she's obviously over there in this scene, and she's over here in this scene, but this is empty, which is perfect. So all we need to do is go into this image here, and we're going to create our mask. So we go down to our little yin-yang, not yin-yang, sorry, the Japanese flag, and we're just going to paint some black ink on top of her. So I'll go make sure that my swatch is at black, and magic. The incredible disappearing photographer. And there we go. So if you want to get a photograph of the Eiffel Tower without the vehicles, without the people, all you need to do is sit in one place and take about 1,000 photographs. It's a lot of photographs, but the point is you can actually create an image where you don't have any of those scenes inside there. So I'm going to remove that photograph now and go back to our original, well, not the original, but the photograph that I had here. Now, I did continue doing work on the image itself after I'd done that. And I've kept the layers here just to give you an indication of what is possible when you're working on it. Now, when I was shooting this scene, I was looking in particular at that blood red color that you get in that orange in the sand, and I loved the texture that you got out of the grass, and also there was an interesting texture and kind of luminosity coming off the wood itself. So I've worked on these different layers individually, so I'm going to go through them like so you can actually see what I've done. So first off, let's do this grouping here. There we go. Right. So first off, there's my straight image. This is from without the photographer. I've obviously not cloned her, but masked her out. I've cropped into the frame that I want. This is my base image, and this is what I often call my base image. So all the bits and pieces where you're blending photographs, that's just your starting point. It's not the final thing that you're doing. It's just a starting point. So first step, I wanted to introduce some more contrast to the photograph. So I've done a very simple contrast curve that you can see over here. I've lightened up my lights so that you've got more detail in the grasses themselves, and I've kept my shadows more or less the same. But essentially, just introducing some contrast. Okay, but what we want to now do is add a little bit more lightness to our wood itself. So I've added another curve over here, and you can see I've lightened it up again, but this time what I'm doing is I'm actually applying it, and I don't know what happened there, so I must actually delete that. Sorry, there we go. I'm actually applying it to the trees themselves, and only the trees, by creating a mask using luminosity masks. Now I'm only going to touch on luminosity masks very briefly, but it is the most powerful way to be able to make localized selections inside a photograph. And there's a wonderful tool out there now, which you can get for absolute free, gratis, nothing, ziplo, and it is the Tony Caper simple panel, the V6 basic panel. I think I've got it over here, actually. Let me just I'll just go into extensions and pull it up. TK, not the infinity mask. Sorry. Ooh, crud, what happened? Have I just lost everything? Oh, lovely! I've just crashed Photoshop. So excuse the hiatus as we come back. Recovering large document. Still, it's miraculous that we haven't lost power tonight as well. So, okay, it's getting there. Sorry, I do apologize. My computer's been doing heavy lifting all day, so I suspect it's time to shut it down and let it go to sleep. Right, we are still missing that other photograph, so I'm just going to open it up again. So go back through to here. I want this one. No. Where's this image? Open with Photoshop. Almost back online. Come on. So even with a powerful computer, we still end up with spinning balls of death and tea making time. So I drink a lot of coffee. A lot of coffee, especially when these lines start slowing down. Getting there now. Come on. Okay, maybe I'm just looking at what other images we're going to look at quickly. If I have time, I will go through the HDR panoramic stuff just to show how simple it is. But I also have an article that I wrote on it, which I can share with the group if you would like, which is also bedtime reading, so to speak. Here we go. Great. I'm just going to switch off the mic thing there. Okay, so this is a worthwhile tool to look for. I'm just going to open it up over here. So we're going to go extensions. Oh, come on. Window, extensions, TK Basic V6. All right, so this is the TK Basic V6 panel. And what you do is you can use it to create selections. So let's say I want to select these brown trees. So I know that it's a fairly dark selection. So I'm going to choose my darks over here. It's going to create a black and white sort of version of the image, and which is actually going to look more like an infrared version. So let's keep going for the darker ones. And there we go. So if I were to create this as a mask, and I would just literally say, click on selection, all these little white pieces here are essentially going to be what is selected. So I've used a similar tool to be able to, and in fact, I just want to cancel that. So that, let's just go cancel. There we go. So when you look at my mask here, I've done pretty much that. I have selected, send crash report, don't send. I've basically selected my trees and then taken a black brush and moved around in areas where I don't want it applied. Okay, so it's a very simple way of doing it. And it's free, which is always great. And there's lots of tutorials online which make it even easier because they're available. And yeah, so it's the Tony Caper or TK Basic V6 panel. Free, easy to use, and the best way to be able to make these seamless kinds of selections. Okay, so at any rate, if we look at this, what I did with this little section is I just lightened up a little bit of my trees again. Then in the next one above this, let's just close off all of these things here, sorry, so we can see what we're doing. Right, so you can see how there we go. You can see how I lightened up that sort of green tone on the trees themselves. After that, I decided I needed to also increase the color and the bit of the contrast in the sand itself. So this time around, all I've done is I've made a selection that selects the sand. Although I didn't use the luminosity masks over here, I used a color selection tool. So color selection tool, also fairly simple. All you need to do is you go up to your select and you say color range and you choose your reds, and there you go. You can actually see my mask over here. So in fact, I'm going to do this, right, and just add to it, and there's my mask. So if I were to then say okay, there's my marching ants all the way around, and it's selecting all of these lovely red colors. So very, very simple. It's not a difficult tool to use. If I now were to go and create a new thing over here, so let's just do a quick curves control over here, I could then just affect that area that I've selected. Okay, so obviously that's not what I wanted to do. What I did want to do though is just add some more contrast to my sand. So you can see the sand has got a little bit more detail inside there. It's gone slightly darker so that you get that slight sort of late afternoon, evening feel coming into the image itself. All right, then this last one, what I did over here is added contrast to my photograph. But what I wanted to do was only add the contrast to the actual, to the bark itself. So I'm going to zoom in to my bark over here, and you can see what I've done when I switch this on and off. I'm not sure if it's quite going to show all the way through zoom, but there's now a lot more crunch and detail to the bark itself as it runs down the trees. So what I did is I used a smart filter. You can do it on any kind of layer. The simplest way is actually just to combine all your images into a separate layer, sharpen it as much as you like, and then create a mask like this. So again, I've just created a mask and I've decided those are the areas that I want to sharpen up, and it's where the white trees are. Okay. Then I have this layer over here, layer 2. I'm trying to remember what I did with this one. Oh, sorry, that layer 2 is actually an invisible layer. So here you can see, to get that sunlight coming through, all I've done is I've added another mask. Very simple, just with a brush. And I have, again, played with my curves control. The curves control is the most important control in Photoshop. You've got to learn how to use it. Very, very powerful tool. You can even do color corrections and color grading with the curves tool. So this layer 2 is actually invisible. I can delete it. It was just there because I then pulled it into Pro Contrast, which is Nik effects, and it just sort of tidied up some edges. I've done a cleanup. The cleanup itself is just dust spots, and then a final sharpening layer. And there you go. There's your photograph. So we went from this without the Russian photographer to, whoopsie, let me just do, I've gone and switched everything off again, to that. Okay, so again, try and think about the photograph in terms of how you want it to look as a final result before you start editing it. And this is closer to how I perceived the scene when I photographed it. So when and this is one of the things that I talk about on workshops as well, is that when we look at photographs, you need to be able to figure out what it is you're feeling when you see the scene. And I know it sounds sort of esoteric and everything, but it really does make a difference if you look at a scene and you're excited about it. And you go, wow, I want people to feel the cold, or I want people to feel a sense of awe, or I want people to feel angry. If, for instance, activism photography, like a dying gorilla, you don't want people to look at it and go, oh, that's a pretty photograph. So don't photograph it like it's pretty. You photograph it for the shock value. So all of these things, you need to actually have a sense of what it is you are trying to achieve as part of your storytelling process when you're actually processing and when you're shooting the photograph. Which brings me to this image over here. Now, this was shot quite recently on a snow mission to, in fact, yeah, so I'm going to open this up. Open with Photoshop. So this was shot quite recently, theoretically in the middle of lockdown, when the advantages of having a photographer's permit. So I wanted to get this photograph where you can see the haze from the moon going down, and then you've got the lovely tent nicely lit up and everything. And it's a very simple photograph, but there's a problem. When you're photographing the stars, if your stars are in focus, like they are over here, your tent is going to be out of focus. So this is what we call a focus stack image. And I'm going to take these back quickly, and I'm going to point out that I've got two photographs here. This first layer here, if I switch this off, you'll notice that my tent is out of focus over here. So I took a photograph of the stars, which is this first layer, where our stars are in focus. There's a little bit of trailing because it was a 30-second exposure, but the stars are in focus. My horizon is in focus, but my tent is very much out of focus. So what I then did is I photographed a second photograph. Now, this I layered on top, and all I did is I created a mask. Now, if I switch this mask off, you'll notice my stars are out of focus in this photograph, but my tent is in focus. So this is what a focus stack is. It's when you've got a photograph that you know that the depth of field is not going to be able to cover the foreground and the background. So we take two photographs, one photograph of the background, one photograph of the foreground, and then you just do a very simple mask, and this is a very simple mask. I'm going to click on it so you can see what it looks like. And there it is. There's my mask. Because it was so dark, I was able to just use a brush and just go and paint it across, and there you go. So my stars are in focus, my tent is in focus. And then just to lighten up the area so that you can see the spill of light from the tent itself, I've just added a contrast curve where I've just literally bumped it up. You can see that over there. And this is the area that it's affecting, where I've created my mask. Okay. And then I've just done one final little pop in Nik effects. Nik effects, incidentally, is a fantastic way to just polish up your last bit of photographs. I use it for a lot of images. I found I can achieve the same thing in Photoshop, but what it takes me in Photoshop half an hour to do, I can do in about a minute in Nik effects. So why kill yourself in front of a computer when something else can do it for next to nothing? So I don't mind using certain filters. Nik effects, most of the program is it's not necessary. I use about 6 filters inside there, but those 6 filters are fantastic and they speed up my workflow immensely. Okay, right. Those are the main images I wanted to look at.
Sorry, Emil, what is that nick effects?
Pardon me?
You said you use nick effects.
Nick effects. Yeah, let me show you what it looks like. So this is, let me find I'm actually going to do it with this image quickly. So let me just go in here, create a new layer. So I've just done that claw. So Shift Alt Command E. I've created this new layer over here. And now I'm going to open this one in Nick Effects by going Layer. And I've already have everything plugged in. So I'm going to say Filter, Nick Collection, Color Effects Pro. And it's going to bring this up inside the program itself. So I can quickly, oh no. This is going to, it's because it's, let's just say later, hopefully it'll actually load the image. Every now and again, it has a little fanny wobble, and then I've got to do something about it. Let's see. Right. It's going to open. Yes, it's opened. Right, great. Okay, cool. So basically, these are all the filters that you've got that you can choose from. So if you want to do the whole Instagram thing and make it all rosy, you can do that if you want to. Or if you want to put tons and tons of contrast and detail into an image, you can, because they are all here. All these little filters, which all seem to be dead now. Why is this not working? Ah, see, I told you it's had a little bit of a cadenza later. Ah, good. There we go. Now it's working. No, it's still not working. Okay, right. So here are all the different filters that you can get. Okay, this used to be free, incidentally. Google owned it, and they gave it out for free. Now, unfortunately, you've got to pay for it. But every now and again, you can find somebody who's still got the old free copy, and the free copy still works. Okay, so yeah, if you've got the free one, pull it out. It still works. It's still fantastic. It hasn't really improved that much since DxO bought it. But so the things that I like doing to them is, let me just quickly pull it into my favorites. There we go. You can see I've starred. These are the things that I use a lot. So I'm going to go to Pro Contrast, which is already there. And you can see that what it does is it can automatically correct your color cast. But this is where it gets exciting, is your dynamic contrast. See that? Can really just open up the photograph and give it a little bit more pizzazz, for want of better words. But you can also do things like the glamour glow, for instance. It's quite a useful one. It's basically like that Orton effect. But very importantly, you can apply it to certain areas, like you would do as a normal mask, except it's a clever mask. So I can go to control points, and if I click on a control point, it then selects just that particular area. So if I were to actually look at what my mask looks like now, that's what my mask is. So it's only selecting where you can see the white. Okay, all the black area inside there isn't selected. And you can actually increase the number of those like that, so that it's only affecting the sky, for instance. And we can reduce in the foreground like this. I've got there's also an article that I've written on this, which I'm happy to share. In fact, it's on the website, I think. So the basic idea is that you can then apply your filters just where you want to apply your filters. Let's say I wanted to add more detail to my tent. So I would say, add a new filter, detail extractor. So you can actually see there's the before and after. So there is definitely more detail in the tent. And we can then just come in and select just our tent. Just like so. So you can see that only the tent is affected. Then when you press OK, what this does is it pulls it straight back into Photoshop. It's going to give me a bit of a spinning ball for, oh, it crashed again. Lovely. Sorry about that. My Photoshop is obviously having issues today. All right. Okay, at any rate, it brings it back into Photoshop as a separate layer with all those adjustments, so you can further refine your image from there if you would like to. Right, that is a lot of information I've thrown at you, I realize, which is one of the reasons why, yay, it's recording. I believe it's still recording. I still have a little red button going on over here, so I will make this available to you so you can go through slightly slower, and hopefully that'll help. Otherwise, yeah, any questions? Hopefully not too much stuff. And we've been lucky tonight. The internet hasn't died. There's still power. Hallelujah. So, okay, right. So just last thing as well. I know some of you are interested in filters and stuff. Literally today, one of the Cape Town retailers has handed back a whole bunch of brand new 100mm Nisi filters, which have been offered to Durban, essentially, at a lower rate. And I can also split stuff up. So if anybody is interested in getting hold of Nisi 100mm filters, I do have the older version, so the older version filters coming through at a reduced price. So just contact me separately if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about those filters that we've got. Okay.
Emil?
Yes.
Would you be able to later on do a separate Photoshop thing on curves just by itself?
Yes, or I can send you the link that I've already done it. I've got a video.
Oh, okay.
I've got a video and an article.
Oh, brilliant! Because a lot of us actually don't know anything about the curves.
Yeah, the curves is the most important control in Photoshop. I use it literally on every single image. So, and the thing about curves is because you can work on the individual color layers, it's actually the original way that color grading was done. If you want to do color grading in video editing as well, you have to know curves because that's how they color grade. So yeah, I will, Lee, what I'll do is I'll find the links to that and I will send that through to you, and you can share those sessions or those articles and stuff. If anybody is interested as well, I put out, it's not exactly monthly, it's when I have the time and the ability to do it. I do put out a fairly regular newsletter, which often has, some of you have actually are on it already, in fact. I see nods. If you would like to be added, if you're not there already, you can just email me or ask Lee for my email if you don't have it, and I can add that. I can add you to that. If you feel like you're being spammed, you can always unsubscribe. It's fairly easy. So, and now that we're in lockdown too as well, I'm hoping to potentially start doing some shoots again where we go socially distanced, of course, with masks, where small groups of us can go out and actually shoot again. So
fantastic. That's what we all need, I think.
Yes. I was going stir crazy before I actually finally stepped outside and did some photography. But yeah, I don't think lockdown has treated many of us particularly well. So, although I'm sure you all spent time in your gardens photographing insects.
Yeah, we did do that.
I got to know all my little insects. Okay, right. Well,
fantastic. Thank you very, very much. I think we've learned a lot, and I'm sure we'll be all going back through it slower.
Yeah, I think you'll probably learn more once you go step by step. I did rush it, I realize, but
no, that's fine.
Yeah, with the video that will hopefully help. So I will try and get it up to you tomorrow, so that you, while it's still fresh in the head, you can do something with that. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Cool.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Emil.
Lovely seeing some familiar faces again. It's been a long time. So,
thanks very, very much.
Okay, because I'm the host, I think once I switch it off, everybody will disappear. So, but at any rate, yes, I hope to see some of you in person fairly soon. In that case, right?
Right.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Emil. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I can actually leave you as host.